Welcome to the Asset Protection Security Discipline within the Cloud Adoption Framework Secure Methodology. My name is Mark Simos, Lead Cybersecurity Architect at Microsoft. So when we take a look at asset protection, this is a really interesting discipline, and it's one that has a lot of history within IT and IT security, or information security, or cybersecurity, as you prefer to call it. So what this is effectively, once we have that governance set and the policies and standards established, it's really about applying that and applying it consistently to all of the resources. Now, we have to apply a different set of policies and standards to different resource types, because securing a mobile device is similar to securing a end user workstation or endpoint, but it's not exactly the same. And securing an application is completely different. Securing a database is often very different from that. Cloud services are different than on-premise servers. Definitely some similarities, but different. So it's really important to understand, as you apply these policy and standards to it, to these resources, that that you have to kind of apply them uniquely. And the way that we think about asset protection, this actually ties into some, I've been at Microsoft 21 years, so I do remember how we approached and thought about security back in the early 2000s. And we actually ended up bringing back some terminology from back then because it really applies well, which is you've got really kind of two different priorities here. One is to get secure, make sure that these apply, these standards and security controls are applied in the first place. And then staying secure ongoing over time, because you don't want that configuration drift or the changing of the assets, especially with the speed of cloud assets, to be essentially undermining your security posture. And so this is where things, some very familiar security concepts like protecting data at rest or encrypting data at rest and in transit really apply. Anything that's specific to those assets that we mentioned earlier, that's particular to keeping a database protected versus a mobile device or other cloud service. And then staying secure, this is really where it's super important to make sure you keep an eye on the security configuration and security status of your current of those devices over time. And this is, especially for things like software and then firmware, which is kind of like software that's embedded into hardware, halfway between software and hardware. I actually learned the nature of that joke only, within the past month or two. That it's been around implicitly in industry for years. And then software and protocols. So there's a big sense of legacy here that you've got to keep an eye on understanding. What legacy protocols do you have? Are you running a LAN-MAN or old versions of SMB protocols, or something that's even older, such as in the OT environments? But keeping that as current as you possibly can, within the constraints of the environment, and really working to keep that protection secure. So you might notice that the icons here are checklist, and that was actually a deliberate choice. Because there's a great expression by that was coined by John Lambert, at least that I first heard from John Lambert, that attackers think in graphs and defenders think in lists. And that is absolutely true. And in security operations and access control and all these places, you really, throughout security, you really have to understand kind of what an attacker can do from one place to get to the next, to get to the next. But there is also a place for checklists as well. And asset protection is really a great place for this. And the way that I think about this is you want, for example, an airline pilot. You want that pilot to be intelligent, thoughtful, adaptive, to understand and have human judgment as they go through and fly a plane. With the exception of some specific circumstances. When they're doing a pre-flight checklist, you don't want that person to be kind of doing something a little different each time or inventing something as they go when they're doing a pre-flight checklist. You want that pilot to be making sure that everything is exactly as it should be before going on that flight and essentially being in the air and away from the airport. So the same is very similar is true in the asset protection space. And there's a couple things here As we move to the cloud, definitely want to tie into the capital expenditure and operational expenditures that are going on. You want security to just be a normal part of how you deploy something. So as you put new assets out, there should be sort of security budget effort associated with that. The percentage of every project should have security in it, and so it's just a natural part of it. And this is really important because everybody, as security has become important over the past, it depends on the organization, but it might have been 5 years ago, might have been 10 years ago, might have been 5 months ago, might have been 5 minutes ago. Security has all of a sudden become very important. But we have 20, 30, sometimes 40 or 50 years of IT decisions that were made and business decisions that were made when security was not important. And so we have this sort of technical debt, this legacy that we have to pay down. And so that when you have such a large amount of things that you have to do, which we do in security, you've got to be rational about it. And the way that we think about this is going forward, you want to make sure you're not creating any more brownfield. You're not creating any more legacy, new assets that don't meet the current security standards. So that's the first thing. So your problem space doesn't keep growing as your business and your opportunities and your IT environment grow. And so starting with that greenfield approach, and then once you've got that under control and you've got these new assets in the cloud and the new DevOps processes and they're doing things securely, that being the main focus there, then okay, now let's take a look at all the stuff that accumulated over the past 20, 30, 50 years and see how we can fix that. Can we attach it to a IT modernization project and say, you know what, this app is not just insecure, but it's actually not doing a good job for the business because it's so inefficient. We can use a cloud service and replace that. So you really want to be flexible and thoughtful as you go through here. And the last thing before we close out is kind of the people and the responsibilities. Because ultimately the asset protection almost always falls on IT operations. Sometimes it falls on DevOps if they own the resources, they maintain and manage them. It kind of depends on where the responsibility line is between those DevOps teams and the central IT operations. But almost always it's IT operations. Sometimes security is responsible for providing expertise and guidance for those IT operations teams. But this tends to be associated with the asset owners, and security provides the standards. Really depends on your individual organization, but that's one of the things that we've observed. And then the last piece here, we've kind of alluded to the fact that maintaining all these things, we've used that word maintenance very intentionally, because just like you have, say, a fleet of trucks, you wouldn't expect that you can run those trucks 24/7 without ever bringing them to the shop, without ever changing the oil. There's an expectation that you have to do maintenance on that equipment, on those machines, so that they're actually kept in good working order. You don't want to wait until they break down and then you're out of the truck for days and losing money. And so there's a similar dynamic in software as well. And this is really important for business leaders in particular to understand, is that ultimately it's very important to recognize that even though the software seems to be working well, if it's very out of date, you need to invest in the maintenance of it. So that's an important element of to really think in terms of, hey, this patch and applying this patch and requiring a reboot, you're going to interrupt business operations. Well, that's based on the assumption that business operations have to be 100% all the time. You've got to build into the maintenance schedule. You've got to build into the forecasts that, hey, we've got to maintain this equipment or it's going to break down. And the breakdowns in cybersecurity, those breakdowns actually happen because an attacker finds the vulnerability. It's not that the engine itself breaks down like a physical machine. So it's a little bit of a different dynamic of when the breakdowns happen, but that concept of maintenance still applies really well. So with that, we're going to close out on asset protection, and thank you all for listening.